I'm KD20MIL. I'm gonna take you behind the beat for Microdosing, the single for Golden Teacha. Golden Teacha sort of kind of took a life of its own. We weren't necessarily trying to create it, but it just sort of created itself. It's just a beat that I was working on at the time to help build that project. A lot of times when I create, I just kind of explore and just try to find sounds that inspire me. Microdosing in particular was just really just exploring and just finding different sounds and trying new things that I wouldn't do. Not really forcing anything, not really trying to make a particular sound, you know, just vibing and exploring with different sounds and different instruments. There were definitely sounds that, you know, that inspired the overall project. The entire project was produced using the TR-808 drum kit. My boy D.Will, he the one that got me to start using that drum kit. It's probably a drum kit I probably would have never used before on my own. I started to kind of play around with the TR-808, find my own vibe with it. Kind of has like a nostalgic feel, but also sounds modern. It feels like you're in the 80s, but at the same time, you're in modern day as well. That's what's special about the Golden Teacha, is that it's got that really great nostalgic feel. I like to use weird sounds that you may not hear. I like to take sounds that are kind of funky and just kind of create my own chord progressions with those, you know, make my own style. A lot of my music prior to the Golden Teacha and Microdosing was, you know, I'm using a lot of trap drums, sounds you would hear like in trap music, but these sounds in Golden Teacha in particular were more so sounds that you'll hear in 70s disco, funk music. I kind of took those elements and kind of applied them more in the hip hop way. So just using different genres of music, I would say, using those as inspiration to create my own sound. I definitely think there was an element of like just subconsciousness when it came to the instruments that I use. It's a feel. It's like, you know, any producer knows, like when you're creating, you hear the right sound, you know that's the sound you want to use. And then as we kept making more records, it just was like finding sounds that complement the records, the sound of the records that we had already created. A lot of times I create melodies for me, like I'll hear a sound, the melody may pop in my head and I may start beatboxing that melody in my head so I won't forget it. Then I'll just try to find the keys or the chords that I hear in my head. Today I'm gonna just, as far as like microdosing, I'm just gonna break down the beat, break down some of the, you know, the drums I use, break down some of the melodies, and just kind of take you through the whole creative process from the beat making side of, you know, how, you know, we created this vibe. It all originated with the beat, so I plan on, we're just gonna deconstruct the beat, kind of show y'all different layers of how I started it and different melodies that I stacked on top of each other to create the overall beat. So typically when me and Zach work, we, you know, I'll have a beat, and a lot of times the song I just have the idea. It's kind of like a canvas. You know, a blank canvas with, I guess you can consider the beat like a blank canvas that gives him open range with whatever ideas he may have as far as like the direction of the overall song. I made the beat here. I think we recorded it at Castle Hill Studios. It was one of those things where I poured over the beat, played it for London and Zach. They loved it. London rearranged the beat a little bit based on Zach's lyrics and the hook and all that, but it just that's kind of been our whole work process. I'll create the beat, pull up the beat, play it, and they'll just start vibing to it. We'll start vibing to it, and then the song ideas come from that. Probably show like the drums I started with, and then kind of show usually kind of how I start is I wasn't even like using them type of drums before, but I kind of just started playing around with them, kind of finding my own workflow, my own vibe with those particular drums. Like I said, I got this. That's the TR-808 drums. I got them from my boy D.Will. So when I was making Microdosing, I kind of played around and I got this. This kind of how I started. Making the beat itself was, I started with the drums itself. So typically from there, typically from there, I'm like, with this type of beat, I would start with the drums, and then I'm usually get inspired with some type of bass line on top of the drums. I got Trillion. A lot of people use Trillion. It's just a bass line. It's just a VST that people use for just different basses. But I think I actually got this kind of like this futuristic kind of bass from out of Omnisphere. Let me see. So once I got like a kind of feel for the drums and kind of a main element of the bass, I'll have like different sections of the song that I have like a different bass line melody or a bass line pattern. But to start, I started off with that, and then typically from there I just go through just different sounds just to try to find some type of, find some type of vibe.
How do you come up with like the bass line melody? Did you just pick it out on a keyboard?
Yeah, typically with the bass line melody, like I'm just going off the groove of the drums, and then I get inspired through the drums to play the bass line a certain way. You hear a melody in your head coming from somewhere, somewhere out in the universe. Somebody drops a bass line melody in my head, and I'm just translating that message, what I'm saying, through the board. So a lot of times it just be just different keys till I find a pattern. A lot of times it's already created, you know what I mean? It's really just vibing and just kind of finding something that you like. And then once you find a particular bass line sound itself, for me, I get inspired by the sound. That's where a lot of my melodies I feel like are triggered from, is just when I hear a particular sound, a certain melody, I hear a certain melody in my head based on the sound itself.
Did you start with like kicks or hats or snares, or do you do all three at once, or?
I usually start like with the drums itself. I usually start with like the kick, then the kick, adding the snares, and then the hi-hats. That'll give me like the main kind of meat and potatoes, I should say. Or sometimes it's kick, clap, and hi-hats. It just depends on what I'm feeling. But typically I would say kick, snare, and hi-hats, and then that gives me kind of like the main groove, the main feel. And then I may add other instruments, other perks and stuff that's like to fill in different pockets within the drum groove itself, and then just really just build from there. Not trying to do too much though, because you gotta think about, you're gonna add melodies on top of it, then you're gonna add bass on top of it, then there's gonna be somebody rapping on it. So my drums, I try to have like a good bounce, but not overly, not too complicated, just enough for like, people can groove to it and vibe to what's going on. Probably the most important thing that stands out to me about this beat and the Golden Teacha itself as a project is just how organic and how original it sounds. Like when you hear this song, when you hear the overall project, it doesn't sound like anything else. Like we didn't go into it like we're trying to make a project or a single that sounds like this record or that record. We really were just vibing and creating, and it just so happened in doing that we created like our own sound just by exploring on our own. And just, you got these different energies, like my energy, Zach energy, London's energy. We all just kind of mixed together, and that's what that was the product of all our energies mixed together in the studio, just vibing. I kind of had to search through sounds, just to go through search through different sounds to kind of figure out what I wanted to use. And then from there, just exploring like, which sounds work best with the melodies that I was coming up with. But typically once I got one melody out the way, or one sound, it's just, they all kind of just build on top of each other. So for me, it's always been a fairly quick process, because my melodies are like my strong suit anyway. So once I get like the main kind of groove of the beat, and then kind of get one melody started, it's kind of like just a quicker process for me, just because I'm already very melodic anyway. It's just more so at that point, just finding the right sound to match with the melody that you, or just it's like cooking food. Like, you know, you mix different ingredients. Like what sound goes well with, you know, with this other sound, and then what melody can I use with this sound over here that kind of, you know, matches with this sound and the melody of this sound over here. So that's kind of what my thought process, I guess, when I'm going through my creative process. But in this particular track, I started off with like this melody right here. It's pretty simple. So, you know, it's a pretty simple kind of just nothing complicated. But if you hear it in context of the drums and the bass line. And then I think my next sound that I used was I added some chords to it, and like I was telling you earlier, like I'll use like some weird sounds that, you know, because you can sound design to me is just taking a sound and just making it your own and manipulating it, whatever you want to do to it to make it sound a certain way. So I just added this chord. So that's just a simple like 3-chord progression that I kind of added to the previous melody I just played, and the drums and the bass line. This kind of at this point the beat pretty much like, you know, that's pretty much the meat and potatoes of the beat itself. So now it's more so just adding a couple more melodies to complement these, and then just having more melodies more bass lines, I should say, to be able to have different sections of the beat to give the beat some movement. So that's a key thing for me when I'm creating is I like to use the bass line I keep my drums consistent, and then I try to use different bass line melodies to give the track a little bit of movement, and then I will bring in different elements or different melodies during certain parts of the beat, you know, like the hook or the verse, or, you know, at different points in the verse, like the last 4 bars before the hook comes back in. I typically try to switch up the bass line and bring melodies in and out. But for a track like this, microdosing, the drums give you that bounce, that feel. Like you just keep them pretty much consistent, and then use the bass line and the melodies to help, you know, create that movement that you want to create in the track. So from that one pattern, I created, you know, several different patterns as part of this beat in FL. For those who use FL, you know, you can create several patterns, and then in the playlist you can arrange those patterns, you know, to arrange your overall beat. Because you may have a pattern for you can see here, you may have a pattern for you know, I know this right here, this is the hook right here. So those 2 patterns are the hook of the track, and then here I would say is the verse and kind of the pre-chorus or bridge back into the hook, I would say. So typically when I'm creating different patterns, and I know, okay, based on the pattern, this is the hook, and I want the hook to sound a certain way, or I want the bass line to be a certain way, I want the drums to be a certain way, and I'll take stuff in and out of each pattern, and then arrange those patterns in playlist mode to where it's like, you know, an overall, you get your overall beat, overall kind of canvas for your song.
What's the most fun part for you of the process, and conversely, which part is a pain in the ass, but you just got to do it?
For me, the most enjoyable part for me is probably just the exploring. That's another thing I learned a lot through 16 was just like, you can't force music, you know. Every song that I made that I produced that I've loved it wasn't forced. It was just, you just go on this journey and you explore, you mess with different sounds, you mess with different plugins to affect your sound, and you just you can't go into the creative process like, oh, I want to. At least for me, you can't. I don't go into the creative process like I'm going to make this type of track. It's just I'm just in here just whatever I can, whatever I'm feeling that day. That's what I'm gonna create, and I never come in the studio like I'm gonna make an R&B track. I'm gonna make a pop track. I'm gonna make a rap trap. It's just I may hear something. I may play a certain sound. I may play a certain chord progression with a certain sound that inspires me to create a certain style. But I don't go into it like I'm trying to make certain things. So I would probably say that's the funnest part, just the exploring and just kind of each day your vibe is gonna be different. How you feeling is gonna be different. So just exploring how you feel and how the frequencies of these different sounds you're playing around with, how they inspire you in different ways. And I would say for me, probably the most tedious or time consuming part I would say would probably be the arrangement piece of it, because arranging you kind of want things to be, you're thinking of, okay, song structure. It's kind of more technical. You're kind of thinking, okay, I want to switch the beat up here. I want to drop this out here. This is where the hook's gonna go back in. It's a lot more thought process to it. And sometimes it's a quick process. On other beats, it's just a little more complicated because of you may have started the beat a certain way, so now you don't know. You're trying to get a feel for how you want to arrange it. So I would say arranging for me is probably the most tedious, but it's the creative process of just getting an idea or a loop down that I can build into a beat. That's probably like my most enjoyable part.
How much restructuring do you do by clicking and dragging and moving stuff around on the computer versus like just replaying it or using the keyboard as a musician?
Typically, I don't do a lot of clicking and dragging. There's not wrong with that. I typically create patterns, and it's just something I learned through N16 is just create patterns that have like different patterns that you can kind of use in FL. When I'm arranging my patterns, I'm clicking, of course, but when I'm creating patterns, I'm typically just I'm playing the bass. Only thing I may click in is when I'm clicking in the drums in FL. That's for me is an easier process. But as far as like playing melodies, I'm typically just playing chords and melodies, just by hand on the keyboard.
Was there like a moment when you were putting this particular beat together that you knew that it was going to fulfill that use case for microdosing as a song, or like was there any significant moment like while you were making this beat where you either got hung up on something or you're like, oh yeah, this is the one?
I ain't gonna lie, when I made this beat and I just heard how like this is one of them beats where I was honestly like, man, I can't even believe I made this shit, because it was just so crazy. It just sounded so like just different. And so I knew when I made it, when I was done arranging the beat, getting ready to pack my stuff up, meeting them at the studio, like I knew like Zach, London they gonna go crazy when they hear this. And so when I came to the studio and played it, that's exactly what happened. This was one of them beats where I knew we about to go crazy tonight. So I just knew. And like I said, just the sounds, man, like I mean that's some weird shit, man. Like you hear that, like where do you I added that into the beat. That's like listen to how this shit sounds. That I got like from it had to be like some early '90s kind of like LL Cool J or just some it's just I don't know where I got it from somewhere. I know somebody used it because I've heard it before, but that come from somewhere. I just don't know where it come from. Because when I heard this sound, I know I done heard this melody somewhere. So I took that and I just added it to what I already had. So that's another element. Like, people be thinking, like, you know, music, none of us own, like, we're a vessel through which music is transmitted. You know what I'm saying? So it's like a library. It's just think of the universe like a library. Like, somebody else's music from like the 50s or 60s, like Duke Ellington, like in the 30s, 20s and 30s, whenever he was around. Like, I think art is just being inspired by other people, but using like their art to build your own sound. It ain't necessarily copying nobody. It's really just, you know, taking what they did and just being inspired by what they did, and then just making your own sound. You know, so that's kind of what how I view it. You know, as far as being open to trying new things, and you know, just my whole overall creative process. Because you're not the one. You didn't create the sound and the melodies that you hear. You hear them in your head. At least for me, I hear these melodies in my head. So these melodies are coming from somewhere else. I'm just transmitting the message. And that's how I always looked at music. And that's how I feel like when I got to that point as a producer, that's when I started to grow. Because I realized that this music is coming from somewhere else. I'm just blessed enough to be able to transmit it in a way through FL, this keyboard. If there's any takeaways, I would just say, man, just from going through this creative process or showing y'all my creative process, I hope this, you know, inspires somebody to, you know, do their own thing. Use the sounds you want to use, you know, because what inspires you may not inspire me, but that don't make either one of us right or wrong. So I think we're in an age now where everybody's like trying to make the same type of music, you know what I'm saying? So generally speaking, not everybody, but if anything, I would just tell people to just create your own music, because you your own individual person, you your own vibe. So show people your vibe and not necessarily try to mimic somebody else's vibe because it's cool, because your vibe is dope too. So at least that's kind of how I approach it. I don't try to make music like nobody. Like, it's people's music who I may get inspired by, and I may say, you know what, I like how they did this or that. Let me see how I can implement what they did in their sound into my sound. But I would just say, man, just if you like it, it's good. You know what I'm saying? Because you know when you feel it, when you feel it yourself, like, that's really that's all that matters, honestly. So that's what I would say. Cause Golden Teacha, like, it's a dope project, but it sounds so weird and it's so different, but it's so fire at the same time. But if I break down some of these instruments we use, it's like that shit sound crazy. But when you put it all together, it came out dope. So that's what I would say. Just make your own music and love your own vibe. You ain't gotta be like nobody else.